Welcome back. We are joined today by Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff to the U.S. Secretary of State. Thank you for coming back on. I've been dying to get your take on what's happening in Iran. But first of all, you sent in a text to a newspaper on the first day of the war where you said that how this war developed depends on many things. It depends on the actions of Russia and China, the shortage of vital munitions, the resilience of the Iranians, the actions of other actors on the grounds, the energy facilities, how they are impacted, also what will happen to these critical straits. That is Bab al-Mandab, which is then can block off the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. And also you ask, well, it also depends how the American public reacts to this war. So now that we're in day 5, how do you assess this war? I have to say, in terms of identifying variables which are important to see, you pretty much was a good way you nailed it. It's a good way of saying it.
Well, first of all, I'd have to say I've developed some new variables too, in addition to those. But you introduced me as Chief of Staff to the Secretary of State.
Oh no, sorry, I meant. Oh yes,
Yeah, that's right. You're right. You're absolutely right. That was my last position. But I just want your listeners to know that 31 years in the United States military, a lot of which were spent as a military planner, planning for war. Particularly in the largest unified command then in the repertoire, the U.S. Pacific Command, which fed forces to Central Command. Central Command was just a tiny little blot on the map. We gave them all their forces or didn't give them to them most often because we didn't want to give them to them. Different business today. It's grown to be the most powerful command, arguably, in the unified command plan. And I say all that so everyone who's listening knows that I've been here and I've done that with regard to Iran. I was there when the war started, like World War One in the Levant between Iraq and Iran, and we backed Iraq. I was there when we made decisions to back Iraq, to defeat Iran because we didn't like Iran after the revolution. I was there when they stood up to Iraq and were going to march on Baghdad. And then we entered the war ourselves with naval combatants in the Strait of Hormuz, one of which was hit with a mine and we almost lost it. Another one limped back after Saddam Hussein fired 2 Exocet missiles at it and hit it. Bridgerton, an oil tanker, was hit. The captain was very angry with us and on and on. All to say, I know this region well in terms of military action and in terms of geography and in terms of the difficulty of the terrain and the, shall I say, the nature of the Persian people who are resilient to a fault and who fought that bloody 8 years of war against our chemical weapons supplied to Saddam Hussein. And we're going to march to Baghdad. The culminating act, as most people will not remember or never knew, is a U.S. Aegis cruiser in the sea fired a missile or two at an Iranian Airbus with 290 some odd people on board, and we killed them all. And that's when the then Ayatollah said, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm accepting a UN resolution on how to end this conflict because I can't fight the empire too. And since that time, all to say, they've been trying to figure out how to fight the empire. And that's the first thing I would say about the nature of this conflict, which, if you read your Clausewitz, you know the one thing you need to do anytime you're contemplating using the military entrance to turn policy into violence is you need to understand the nature of what you're entering upon, the nature of the conflict. We do not. Every statement from Marco Rubio, every statement from Peter Hegseth, every statement from Donald Trump, indeed every statement out of the administration to include that bimbo who is the spokesperson for it, that blonde bimbo, has indicated to me they do not understand the nature of this conflict, the leading factor of which is we're taking on a people who are 3,000 years old, 90 million strong, 53% Persian, and who have lots of problems, but who will seal themselves into their very doom in order to give us a truly vicious headache. And that's what they're embarked on. And they're not going to stop. They're not going to cease until the last one of them is dead. And we can rout out all the Kurds we want to try and hire them to fight for us and others like that in the region. And therein lies another disconnect in our understanding of this conflict, the nature of it. The objective of Bibi Netanyahu, for whom we're fighting this war, is chaos, not putting in Tehran a regime that would run a reasonably quisling state, or at least a state that got along with the United States and sold us the oil and everything else. He wants chaos, total chaos in the region, just like he tried to get in Syria, because it's his plan and people behind him, like Naftali Bennett and others, to run rampant over the entire Levant from, ready for this, Erdogan? From Turkey to Eastern Africa. That is Netanyahu's goal. And oh, by the way, all the Arabs in between. That's what he's after. And don't think that when he dies or goes to jail or whatever, it will stop there, because they'll still be doing it. Turkey right now needs to worry about, for example, intelligence assets of Mossad and other assets too, that are operating in Cyprus and in southern Greece, preparing the battlefield, if you will, for when they march on Turkey. So the nature of this conflict that I did not necessarily touch upon in my response that you sort of quoted from there is that it has every potential, not just to go regional, but to go global. To marry itself with Ukraine, for example, with our efforts in Georgia, with our efforts in Armenia and in Azerbaijan, with our efforts all along the southern rim of the old Soviet Union to destabilize Russia, and ultimately to aim an arrow at the heart of China. All of this is a part of that. Every bit of what I just said and more is part of the warp and woof of the nature of this conflict. And we're crazy if we think that it's going to be confined to a few days and a few bullets and bombs, and then we're going to march triumphant up on the hill and say, we have a new regime in Tehran or whatever. First of all, Netanyahu's not going to permit that. And second, we're not going to be able to achieve it. So that's what I meant by those general comments, is we do, most importantly of all, Clausewitzian to a T, we do not understand the nature of the conflict upon which we have embarked.
Well, how would you have planned it? I mean, not that you would endorse it, but if again, from your previous roles there in the U.S. government, how would you carry out such an attack if indeed this was an objective to, and what would be the main risks, I guess? Where would your concerns be?
Well, the only answer to that question, if I were chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or advising him as I was with Colin Powell, I would say, don't start this conflict. You do not want to use the military instrument in this way in this region, period. It was 40 years U.S. policy not to use the military instrument from ground bases in the region. We're seeing one proof of that right now, and I can't believe that Marco Rubio was so delinquent in his duties. But I probably have to blame every Secretary of State all the way back from Tony Blinken and Rex Tillerson and a host of others. The forms, the F-77s, the non-combatant evacuation operation forms that tell you where everyone is in your ambassadorship, every American citizen. You have to have their name, telephone number, passport, all these things. And you have that all so you can evacuate them. We didn't. And I'll tell you why we probably didn't, if it just wasn't crass stupidity on the part of Marco Rubio, because we didn't want to give warning. We didn't want the Iranians to see the non-combatant evacuation operations taking place and to understand, diplomacy notwithstanding, we're going to war because the Americans are going to attack. So now we have a lot of American citizens stranded and very difficult to get out because the airports have been closed. You can't fly in, you can't get them out. So we might have some civilian casualties there before this is over, and I lay that directly at the feet of the Secretary of State for an incompetent job, concentrating on too much other than his real responsibilities. So all that to say, I wouldn't start. The military instrument is not the instrument to use in the Levant, period. That's my advice to you, Mr. Chairman. Please, under the new law, the Goldwater Nichols Act, the DOD Reorganization Act of 1985, I have the same power you do to advise the president. So you coming with me to the White House? That's what I'd say to the second death. Pete, you coming with me to the White House? I'm exercising my right under Goldwater Nichols. I'm going to advise the president. You coming with me? If you're not, I don't care, because I'm going to tell him, don't do this. Which apparently Kane did try, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, did try to register some objections. I'm told they were based on munitions we don't have, particularly air defense missiles, on the danger for surface combatants in the region, given the incredible array of missiles Iran has, and some other things like that. But he was not a happy camper, I don't think, about using the military in this manner.
But I wanted to circle a bit back to what you said about Turkey, because this is this is an interesting element, and this whole war, it's spreading so fast. I mean, we're in day 5, and we already see, yeah, lost track of how many countries have been pulled into this and been attacked. And
Look at India, for example. They don't have but 25 days on hand. It's about $15 billion they've got to raise immediately just to reach the oil prices that they are now. And they're going to go higher. So you're right.
But pulling in Turkey, I think, yeah, that would be a disaster. I don't think they could be pulled in, because they say they're not a participant. They don't want to let. They deny that Israel and the U.S. are allowed to use their airspace. They don't like Iran attacking the Gulf states, but they also not happy about America attacking, Iran. So they kind of just want to distance themselves from the whole thing. But you were mentioning this wider ambitions of Israel in the region, and when you had the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Huckabee, he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson asked, what does Israel have right to do this? And well, more or less half the Middle East, if they can take it, they should have it. More or less that was the message, because God gave it to them, or something along those lines. This is this must surely shock the region. And as you said, with Turkey, it's also trying to reposition itself in the world. Again, America's not the only game in town. There's a multipolar world. They want to diversify. They don't want to join any anti-American groupings. But on the other hand, they have to look after their own national interests as well. So how do you see any pathways to Turkey being pulled into this mess somehow?
I think they're already in it, really. I know what you're saying, and I know what their public voice has indicated, but I think they're already in it. I think they are very concerned about Israel stirring up the Kurds and arming the Kurds, which is happening, I think, in order to fight Iran, and having that battle turned around the other way. Because Erdogan is not like any Kurdish group being armed to the teeth, as Israel is apparently doing with these people. So I think they're already watching it very closely. They've got people on the ground. They got people in the area. They got people reporting back to Ankara. I don't know where they'll go, though. That's the question here, because they